So part A and part B are important. You always want a building limit part A if you can get it, because in a scenario where you have a loss that compromises the entire building, you need to demolish the entire building, the rebuilding cost of that undamaged portion is significant. So that's like how that bankrupts an association, right? If the association doesn't have part A and a loss like that occurs, I mean, you're in trouble.
Hello, thank you for joining us today for Policy Party. I'm Negar Sharifi and he's Phil Masi. Today we're going to discuss coverage that seems a little mysterious to a lot of people that's really quite easy to understand. And it's a coverage enhancement that can be added to your property policy. And it's called Ordinance or Law. Phil, this is how we actually got a lot of our clients in the beginning of our careers, because we found that this incredibly important coverage was being left off of property policies by many of our competitors, right? And it's ordinance or law, super important, but it's excluded on all property policies unless you add it back in. So can you start us off by explaining the three parts of ordinance and law, what it covers and why it's important?
Sure. So ordinance and law coverage has three parts, A, B, and C. Part A is the undamaged portion of the building in a loss. Part B is the demolition cost for the undamaged portion of the building. And part C is the increased cost of construction due to code changes. And so I'm going to give you an example kind of what each one is to try to help folks, right? So let's say we have a building that's worth $5 million and it's I think it's easier.
I had one actually. It was 4 stories.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that where it impacts the thing.
Okay, so I'll tell you the scenario and then you talk to me. So association in Kissimmee, washing the dishes. It was over the weekend. And I see it on the news. It was one of my buildings on fire. I think maybe you even texted me like, "Hey, Negar, check the news. I think your account's on fire." Yeah. All right. 4 floors. The top 2 destroyed. Okay. Completely destroyed, gone. The bottom 2 were still there, but completely damaged by water, right? The firemen drenched it. It's been compromised. Building code comes in and goes, yeah, you can't salvage this building. But the first 2 floors were salvageable. The top 2 floors were destroyed. So thankfully, we had ordinance or law coverage endorsed on that policy. So can you explain, using that example, what the A, B, and C were for?
So if you don't have ordinance and law, it's only going to cover the damaged portions of the building. So if in that example, and I can make it even easier, be like 3 and 4 had damage, floors 1 and 2 didn't, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So floors 3 and 4 are what's going to be covered. But in a lot of scenarios, you have structure's compromised, or the building department will not let you rebuild just floors 3 and 4. They require you to demolish the entire building and then rebuild it. Well, if that happened and you didn't have ordinance and law coverage, the policy would only pay for the top 2 floors. It would not pay for the cost of the bottom 2 floors,
because
the undamaged portion.
They weren't damaged.
And it wouldn't pay for the rebuild or the demolition cost of the undamaged. It only pay for the demolition cost for the damaged portion. So part A and part B are important. You always want a building limit part A if you can get it, because in a scenario where you have a loss that compromises the entire building, you need to demolish the entire building, the rebuilding cost of that undamaged portion is significant. So that's like how that bankrupts an association, right? If the association doesn't have part A and a loss like that occurs, I mean, you're in trouble, right? So you can see tornadoes going through a portion of the building, but leaving the other portion untouched. One of those, I used to give the 9/11 example, had the building not come down, but it was structurally compromised. Floors 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you'd never know anything happened.
Yeah.
But obviously the middle structure completely destroyed. You get to the top and everything was okay.
Yeah.
So, those are scenarios where part A and part B come into play. Part C of ordinance and law is the much more common one. It's something you'll see on virtually every claim.
Even smaller claims.
Yeah, even smaller claims. So part C is the increased cost of construction due to code changes. And your insurance policy is there to put you back to where you were originally put, right? So if I have a condo building that was built in the 1980s, for example, and the windows that are in that building, the windows are the association's insurable responsibility, and the windows are 80 mile per hour glass. So the problem is the 1980 windows, the 80 mile per hour windows that were originally there, may cost $1,000 to replace, but the cost of the 2026, whatever the code is today, might be $4,000 to replace. That difference is not covered by the insurance policy unless you have Part C of Ordinance and Law coverage. But this gets into other things other than just windows. You can have fire alarm systems. Your building may not have a fire alarm system, may not have fire sprinkler systems.
Right, that's a
lot
big
of stuff
one.
the 70s and 80s, if you had to rebuild that today, those buildings would need to be sprinklered. And you can have a loss that's large enough in the building where you need to now rebuild it with the sprinkler system installed. Super expensive. Elevators are another big one where there's a lot of upgrades. Roofs too, with roof tie downs, type of shingles, all that stuff that goes in that. So there's a lot of elements of your building that need to be brought up to code, that they were not code when the building was originally built, but now you have enough damage in the building that you're being required to bring it up to code. You can't put back those old windows. You can't put back the old roof, straps. You can't do certain things. So the increased cost of construction due to that code change is not covered by your insurance policy unless you have Part C of Ordinance and Law. And so what you mentioned before is we would win a lot of business because the agents that we competed against didn't include any Ordinance and Law. But I've also seen scenarios where they've included Ordinance and Law, but very small sublimits. Yeah. And, Part A, you obviously want the full limit if you can get it. But Part C, there's a big difference between getting a 2.5% limit and a 10% limit of the building value, or getting a 5 million max versus a 1 million max, or whatever it might be. So the older the property, the more at risk you are to Part C losses. If it's a brand new structure that was just built last year, obviously you're worried about Part A and Part B. Part C is not as big of an issue. But again, every year there's some sort of code change. There's something that's different. And having that is important to keep it going.
And I'll tell you, I've seen this come up in so many ways for claims that didn't even damage the said property that needed to be upgraded. So I've seen, I'm not going to name any, but there's some pretty reputable public adjusters out there where they were able to somehow rope in things like railings that needed to be brought to code and ordinance or law.
Well, railing's another big one. Yeah. Because we see the railings on the balconies being more than a certain amount of inches apart. That's not allowed anymore by code. And so you need to put all new railings in this place. So there's a lot of things. And having that ordinance and law coverage or having a big pot of money there, you can use it when there's a bad claim or any type of claim. You're getting more money for your claim. It's less the association has to be responsible for. A lot of times associations think they're just responsible for the deductible. That's the only money they're not getting. But when you don't have proper ordinance and law coverage, there's parts of the loss that end up being uncovered and you're not getting those funds either in the event of a loss. So it's just an important coverage that I think gets overlooked or misunderstood. And I know our competition isn't out there negotiating increased limits and improving that. And when we do that, I always point it out every year, hey, we got more limit here. We negotiated this. I don't really know if folks understand it or realize the importance of it. And then oftentimes, again, you may be making a decision on insurance based on purely price and not even factoring this in. But I promise, when you have a loss and your building's got any type of age to it, you're going to involve ordinance. You're going to have code upgrade issues, and that is going to be an expensive part of the claim. And to not have that coverage is a mistake.
Well, there you have it. The importance of ordinance and law coverage and what its three parts represent. Thank you for joining us today for Policy Party. I'm Negar Sharifi, Eastville, Masi.